18 months ago, Marcus Thompson disappeared after purchasing an abandoned orphanage in rural Pennsylvania, vanishing without a trace after unlocking a mysterious sealed room that had remained hidden for over 60 years. His disappearance plunged his wife Sarah and twin daughters into devastating uncertainty, while the small town of Millbrook was consumed by whispers and fear. Police investigated multiple theories, from accidental injury to voluntary disappearance, but found no concrete evidence, leaving Thompson's family frustrated with what they perceived as inadequate investigation. Fighting tirelessly to uncover the truth, his wife Sarah refused to accept that her husband simply walked away from everything he loved. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and evidence. Marcus Thompson, 42, was a successful restoration architect from Pittsburgh who specialized in breathing new life into forgotten historical buildings. His portfolio included Victorian mansions, abandoned churches, and forgotten schoolhouses, each project meticulously documented and transformed into vibrant community spaces. When he discovered the Millbrook Children's Home for sale in October 2023, something about the Gothic revival structure captivated him immediately. The orphanage had been shuttered since 1962, following mysterious circumstances that locals preferred not to discuss, leaving the imposing three-story building to decay in silence. The purchase happened quickly, perhaps too quickly, according to his business partner James Morrison. Thompson paid the asking price without negotiation, despite Morrison's concerns about the building's structural integrity and the seller's eagerness to close. Local real estate agent Rebecca Mills remembered Thompson's unusual intensity during their initial walkthrough, noting how he seemed particularly drawn to architectural inconsistencies in the building's eastern wing. He asked repeatedly about sealed doors and questioned why certain rooms appeared smaller from the outside than inside. Thompson's wife Sarah later recalled her husband's growing obsession with what he called the orphanage's secrets. Indeed, he spent hours researching the building's history, diving deep into newspaper archives and tracking down former employees. His excitement was infectious initially, but gradually transformed into something darker, a compulsion that kept him awake at night, sketching floor plans and measuring discrepancies. Sarah noticed boxes of documents arriving daily, filled with adoption records, staff testimonials, and maintenance logs from the orphanage's operational years. The last conversation Sarah had with her husband revealed his discovery of something significant. On the morning of March 15, 2024, Marcus called her from the orphanage, his voice trembling with excitement and something else, something she later described as fear. He had found a room that didn't appear on any architectural plans, hidden behind what appeared to be a decorative wall panel in the basement. The sealed entrance required tools to open, and he was determined to see what lay beyond. That afternoon, Marcus Thompson entered the hidden room and stepped into oblivion, leaving behind only questions that continued to haunt everyone who knew him. The Millbrook Children's Home operated from 1903 to 1962, housing hundreds of orphaned and abandoned children under the stern direction of headmaster William Blackwood and his wife Eleanor. Historical records paint a picture of rigid discipline and strict religious instruction, though former residents who agreed to speak years later described an atmosphere of fear that extended far beyond normal institutional strictness. The orphanage's reputation in the community was complex, publicly respected for its charitable mission, yet whispered about in private conversations that abruptly ended when outsiders approached. Marcus Thompson's research uncovered disturbing patterns in the orphanage's final years. Between 1958 and 1962, 14 children simply disappeared from official records without explanation. No adoption papers, no transfer documents, no death certificates. When Thompson contacted the state's Historical Society, he discovered that the orphanage's closure was abrupt and unexpected. occurring just months after a brief investigation by social services. The official reason cited administrative irregularities, but newspaper coverage from the period was surprisingly sparse for such a significant institutional closure. Former Millbrook residents remembered the orphanage as a place of whispered warnings and unspoken fears. Elderly townspeople recalled children who seemed to vanish overnight, with staff claiming they had been moved to better accommodations or reunited with distant relatives. Local grocery store owner Margaret Chen, now 91, still remembered the peculiar silence that surrounded the orphanage's eastern wing, where children were forbidden to play and staff avoided working alone. She described an incident from 1960 when several children claimed to hear crying from within the walls, only to be severely punished for spreading malicious lies. The building's architectural history revealed intentional modifications that seemed designed to conceal rather than improve. Construction records from 1958 showed extensive basement renovations overseen personally by Headmaster Blackwood, including the installation of soundproofing materials and reinforced concrete walls. These modifications were completed just months before the first unexplained disappearances began appearing in the orphanage's records. Thompson had discovered blueprints showing significant discrepancies between the original 1903 design and the building's actual layout, particularly in the basement area where he would eventually find the hidden room. Thompson's investigation led him to contact surviving family members of missing children, though few were willing to discuss their experiences. Martha Reynolds, whose younger brother Danny disappeared from the orphanage in 1959, agreed to speak with Thompson shortly before his own disappearance. She described how her brother had written letters mentioning strange sounds and bad rooms in the basement, letters that stopped arriving without explanation. When she visited the orphanage to inquire, staff claimed Danny had been transferred to a facility in California, but no records of such transfer ever existed. The pattern Thompson discovered was chilling in its consistency. Children would be sent to work in the basement as punishment, and some would simply never return. Staff would claim these children had been removed from the facility for various reasons, but families were never notified, and no official documentation supported these explanations. Thompson became convinced that something terrible had happened in the orphanage's basement, something that 14 children had witnessed firsthand before disappearing forever. His obsession with uncovering this truth would ultimately lead him down the same dark path. Marcus Thompson's final weeks were consumed by architectural detective work that bordered on obsession. His wife Sarah found blueprints covering every surface of his home office, with red ink marking discrepancies between the orphanage's original design and its current layout. Thompson had enlisted ground-penetrating radar specialists, structural engineers, and even a historian specializing in institutional architecture to help unravel what he called deliberate deceptions built into the orphanage's foundation. His journal entries from this period reveal a man convinced he was on the verge of exposing a decades-old conspiracy. The breakthrough came on March 12, 2024, when Thompson's measurements revealed a significant space unaccounted for in the basement's eastern section. Using blueprints from 1903 and comparing them to the building's current configuration, he calculated that approximately 400 square feet of basement space simply didn't exist according to the floor plan. His excitement was evident in frantic phone calls to Sarah, describing how he had traced the missing space to an area behind what appeared to be a decorative stone panel near the building's foundation. Thompson documented his discovery process meticulously, uploading photos and measurements to a cloud storage account that would later provide crucial evidence. The hidden entrance was ingeniously concealed. The stone panel appeared to be purely decorative, but Thompson discovered it was actually a carefully crafted door held in place by an internal locking mechanism. His photographs showed tool marks around the panel's edges, evidence of his attempts to find the opening mechanism without causing damage to the historical structure. On March 14, 2024, Thompson finally managed to open the hidden panel, revealing a narrow corridor that descended into darkness. His final photos, time-stamped at 3:42 p.m., showed a stone passageway approximately 6 feet high and 3 feet wide. Extending beyond the reach of his flashlight, Thompson's excitement was palpable in his final journal entry. "The corridor leads to something larger. I can feel air movement and hear sounds. Not quite echoes, but something else. Tomorrow I'm going inside. 60 years of secrets end here. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of the day or night they arrive." Thompson's preparations were thorough and methodical. He purchased professional spelunking equipment, backup lighting systems, and communication devices. He informed his business partner of his plans and promised to check in every hour. However, his final preparation would prove inadequate for what awaited him in the darkness. Sarah later found his equipment list, complete with GPS coordinates and emergency contact procedures, evidence of a man who understood the risks but was compelled to proceed regardless of the consequences. The last confirmed sighting of Marcus Thompson was at 11:47 a.m. on March 15, 2024, when he purchased additional batteries at Millbrook's hardware store. Store owner Dale Watson remembered Thompson's nervous energy and his comment about finally getting answers that should have come decades ago. By noon, Thompson was at the orphanage, preparing for a descent into darkness that would consume him completely. His final text message to Sarah, sent at 12:34 p.m., read simply, "Going in now. The truth is down here. I can feel it." The first sign that something was wrong came at 4 p.m. on March 15, 2024, when Marcus Thompson failed to respond to his scheduled check-in call with business partner James Morrison. Thompson was religiously punctual about safety protocols, having learned from years of working in dangerous restoration sites that communication could mean the difference between minor accidents and major disasters. Morrison's concern escalated to alarm when Thompson didn't answer his phone at 5 p.m., then again at 6 p.m., and finally at 7 p.m. Sarah Thompson received Morrison's panicked call just as she was preparing dinner for their twin daughters. The conversation was brief but devastating. Her husband had entered the orphanage's hidden basement room at noon and had been completely unreachable for 7 hours. Sarah immediately drove to Millbrook, a 90-minute journey that felt like an eternity, during which she called Thompson's phone repeatedly, hearing it ring through to voicemail each time. Her last hope was that he had simply lost track of time in his excitement, but deep down she sensed something far worse had occurred. When Sarah and Morrison arrived at the orphanage at 8:45 p.m., they found Thompson's truck parked outside, unlocked, with his keys still in the ignition. His equipment bag sat on the front seat, containing backup batteries, emergency flares, and a first aid kit. Items he had planned to take into the basement but apparently forgot in his eagerness to begin exploring. More troubling was the discovery of his cell phone in the truck's cup holder, which meant he had entered the hidden room without any means of communication. The basement revealed signs of Thompson's presence, but no trace of the man himself. His primary flashlight lay on the floor near the hidden panel, its beam still illuminating the stone corridor beyond. Footprints in the dust showed his path into the passage, but the print seemed to end abruptly about 30 feet into the corridor, as if he had simply vanished mid-step. Morrison, who had experience with cave exploration, noted that the dust patterns were unusually undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of a fall, and no indication that Thompson had turned around to exit. Local police arrived within an hour of Sarah's 911 call, though their initial response was hampered by jurisdictional confusion and the unusual nature of the situation. The orphanage technically sat on county land, but emergency services were managed by the town of Millbrook, creating delays in assembling proper search equipment. Officer Daniel Cruz, first responder on the scene, later described the basement as deeply unsettling, noting unusual acoustic properties that made sounds seem to disappear rather than echo normally. The initial search of the hidden corridor proved frustratingly limited. The passage extended approximately 60 feet before opening into a larger chamber, but unstable ceiling conditions forced searchers to retreat after only cursory examination. Police photographs from that night showed a rectangular room approximately 20 by 30 feet, with stone walls and what appeared to be drainage channels cut into the floor. More disturbing were the items found scattered throughout the chamber. Children's shoes, fragments of clothing, and personal belongings dating back to the 1950s and early 1960s. Evidence that seemed to support Thompson's theory about the missing orphanage children. By midnight, the search was suspended due to safety concerns and would not resume for another 18 hours while specialized equipment was located. Those 18 hours would prove crucial, as subsequent searches would find the hidden chamber mysteriously altered, with several items moved or removed entirely. Marcus Thompson had vanished as completely as the 14 children before him, leaving behind only questions and a family desperate for answers that seemed increasingly unlikely to come. Detective Linda Martinez from the Pennsylvania State Police took charge of the Thompson investigation on March 16, 2024, bringing 15 years of missing persons experience to a case that would challenge every investigative technique in her repertoire. Martinez immediately recognized the complexity of searching an unstable underground chamber while preserving potential evidence from multiple time periods, requiring coordination between police, structural engineers, archaeologists, and forensic specialists. Her initial assessment was grim. The hidden room represented a crime scene that had remained undisturbed for over 60 years, and Thompson's disappearance had potentially compromised crucial evidence. The second day of searching revealed disturbing details about the hidden chamber's construction and purpose. Structural engineer Paul Kim determined that the room had been intentionally built with reinforced walls and soundproofing materials, suggesting it was designed to contain both sound and occupants. The drainage channels carved into the floor showed evidence of regular use, though laboratory analysis of residue samples would take weeks to complete. Most troubling were the shackle points embedded in the walls, iron fixtures that appeared to have been used for restraining individuals based on wear patterns and positioning. Forensic archaeologist Dr. Rebecca Foster arrived on March 18th to document what she described as an organized crime scene preserved in time. Her team carefully catalogued dozens of personal items belonging to children, shoes ranging from size 1 to size 6, fragments of clothing consistent with 1950s orphanage uniforms, broken toys, and heartbreakingly, several small notebooks containing children's writing. The notebooks, remarkably preserved in the chamber's dry environment, contained desperate messages including, "Help us," "We can't get out," and most chilling, a list of 14 names that perfectly matched the missing children from Thompson's research. The investigation expanded to include the orphanage's historical records, leading to the exhumation of headmaster William Blackwood, who had been buried in Millbrook Cemetery in 1963. DNA analysis of items found in the hidden chamber established connections to several missing children, confirming Thompson's theory about their fate. However, this breakthrough was overshadowed by the complete absence of any trace of Thompson himself. No DNA, no fingerprints, no fabric fibers, nothing to indicate he had ever been in the chamber, despite multiple witnesses confirming his entry. Sarah Thompson's frustration with the investigation grew as weeks passed without progress in finding her husband. Police assured her that the case remained active, but resources were increasingly divided between the historical investigation into the orphanage murders and the contemporary search for Thompson. The state police brought in specialist search teams, including cave rescue experts, cadaver dogs, and ground-penetrating radar specialists, but none found any trace of Thompson beyond his footprints, which still ended mysteriously 30 feet into the entrance corridor. The case attracted national media attention by April 2024, with true crime podcasters and documentary filmmakers drawn to the story of a man who disappeared while investigating decades-old child murders. However, this attention proved double-edged, as amateur investigators began arriving in Millbrook, contaminating potential evidence and overwhelming local resources. Detective Martinez was forced to seal the orphanage completely and post round-the-clock security, though she acknowledged privately that the investigation had reached an impasse that forensic science seemed unable to resolve. The Thompson investigation forced Millbrook's long, silent residents to confront their community's darkest chapter, revealing a conspiracy of silence that had protected William Blackwood's crimes for over 60 years. Elderly residents who had worked at the orphanage or lived nearby during its operation began coming forward with testimonies they had kept buried since the 1960s, painting a picture of systemic abuse and community complicity that shocked even experienced investigators. Their revelations would fundamentally change how authorities understood both the historical crimes and Thompson's mysterious disappearance. Former orphanage cook Mary Patterson, now 87, provided the first breakthrough in understanding how Blackwood's operation functioned. Patterson revealed that she had witnessed children being taken to the basement for special punishment and never returning, but had been threatened with dismissal and criminal charges if she spoke about these incidents. She described a network of staff members who were either directly involved in Blackwood's crimes or terrorized into silence, including groundskeeper Thomas Mills and nurse supervisor Janet Walsh, both of whom received significant financial incentives to maintain their loyalty. The community's involvement extended far beyond the orphanage staff, according to testimonies from former Mayor Richard Henley's widow, Dorothy. She revealed that her husband had received substantial donations to the town's general fund from Blackwood, money that was used to improve roads, fund the fire department, and support other popular community projects. In exchange, local authorities were expected to ignore complaints about the orphanage and avoid conducting thorough investigations into reports of missing children. This arrangement corrupted multiple levels of local government and created a systematic cover-up that lasted decades. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a child psychologist who briefly worked at the orphanage in 1961, came forward with the most disturbing testimony about Blackwood's methods. She described discovering evidence of severe psychological abuse designed to break children's spirits and eliminate their will to escape or seek help. Blackwood had created an environment where children were convinced that reporting abuse would result in even worse treatment, and that the outside world would never believe their stories. Dr. Morgan's attempts to report her concerns to state authorities were blocked by local officials who claimed her observations were misunderstandings of necessary discipline. If this case has already captivated you, leave a like. It helps the story of Marcus Thompson reach more people. The investigation revealed that Blackwood's crimes were not random acts of violence, but part of a calculated system designed to eliminate troublesome children who might expose the orphanage's abusive practices. Children who showed signs of rebellion, attempted to escape, or threatened to report abuse were systematically isolated and eventually murdered in the hidden basement chamber. Their disappearances were explained through fabricated adoption records and transfer documents that satisfied cursory inquiries from family members or social services. Local newspaper editor Robert Chen admitted that his father, who ran the Millbrook Gazette from 1950 to 1970, had deliberately suppressed stories about problems at the orphanage in exchange for advertising revenue and other considerations. This media complicity ensured that concerns about missing children never gained public attention beyond whispered conversations among worried residents. The conspiracy of silence was so complete that when state investigators finally arrived in 1962, most evidence of wrongdoing had been destroyed or hidden, allowing many conspirators to escape justice entirely. The revelation of community-wide complicity in historical crimes did nothing to explain Thompson's disappearance, however. Detective Martinez noted that all living conspirators were elderly individuals with no apparent motive or capability to harm Thompson. More puzzling, several witnesses reported seeing lights in the sealed orphanage and hearing sounds from the basement area in the days following Thompson's disappearance, despite the building being completely secured. These reports suggested that either someone else had access to the building or something even more disturbing was occurring in the depths of the orphanage that had claimed both the children and their would-be rescuer. By May 2024, the search for Marcus Thompson had evolved into one of Pennsylvania's most extensive missing person investigations, involving multiple law enforcement agencies, specialized search teams, and cutting-edge forensic technology that pushed the boundaries of what investigators thought possible in cold case work. Detective Linda Martinez found herself coordinating an unprecedented effort between state police, FBI behavioral analysts, geological survey teams, private search and rescue organizations, and academic specialists from 3 different universities, all focused on the seemingly impossible question: how does a man vanish completely from a secured underground chamber with only one documented entrance and exit point? The investigation's scope reflected both the mystery's profound complexity and the growing media attention that had transformed Thompson's case into a national obsession, with true crime podcasters, documentary filmmakers, and amateur investigators descending upon the small town of Millbrook like modern-day prospectors seeking answers buried in darkness. Detective Martinez struggled to balance legitimate investigative needs with the circus atmosphere that surrounded the case, often finding that media attention both helped and hindered her efforts to uncover the truth about what had happened in those final moments before Thompson disappeared. Geological surveys of the area surrounding the orphanage revealed an extensive network of natural limestone caves and man-made tunnels that had been completely unknown to local authorities, despite the region's long history of coal mining and underground industrial activity. Ground-penetrating radar identified at least 6 separate underground passages within a half-mile radius of the orphanage, some connecting to abandoned mine shafts from the area's coal mining era in the early 1900s, others leading to natural cave systems that extended for miles beneath the Pennsylvania countryside. These discoveries raised the tantalizing possibility that Thompson had found a secondary exit from the hidden chamber, though extensive exploration of the cave system yielded no trace of his presence or passage. The complexity of the underground network required specialized cave rescue teams from West Virginia and Tennessee, experts who had experience navigating dangerous subterranean environments where a single wrong turn could prove fatal. Team leader Captain Robert Hayes described the limestone cave system as one of the most extensive he had encountered in 20 years of cave rescue work, with multiple levels, underground streams, and chambers large enough to house entire buildings. However, despite sophisticated mapping equipment and exhaustive searches, the teams found no evidence that Thompson had ever entered the natural cave system from the orphanage's hidden chamber. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit developed a comprehensive profile, suggesting that Thompson's disappearance was likely connected to the historical crimes at the orphanage, though agents remained divided on whether he had been targeted by surviving conspirators, encountered something supernatural in the hidden chamber, or had simply suffered an accident that left his body in an undiscovered location. Agent Sarah Chen noted that the complete absence of physical evidence was extremely unusual, even in cases involving sophisticated criminal planning and professional-level cover-ups. The lack of DNA, fiber evidence, blood traces, or any indication of Thompson's passage beyond the 30-foot mark in the entrance corridor suggested either extraordinary criminal sophistication or circumstances that fell outside normal investigative parameters. Search efforts were severely complicated by the orphanage building's rapidly deteriorating condition and the dangerous instability of the underground chambers, which had been compromised by decades of water damage, foundation settling, and the natural expansion and contraction of limestone bedrock. Structural engineers determined that extensive areas were unsafe for human exploration without expensive shoring and safety equipment that significantly slowed the investigation's progress. Several near-collapse incidents during the early weeks of searching forced temporary suspensions of efforts, though each delay intensified pressure from Thompson's increasingly desperate family and the growing community of supporters who demanded answers at any cost. Private investigator Michael Torres, hired by Sarah Thompson to supplement official efforts with resources and techniques not available to law enforcement, uncovered disturbing evidence suggesting that someone had been systematically monitoring Marcus Thompson's research activities in the weeks and months before his disappearance. Torres discovered that Thompson's computer had been accessed remotely, multiple times, from untraceable IP addresses. His cloud storage account showed download activity from unidentified users, and his email correspondence had been intercepted and copied by unknown parties with sophisticated technical capabilities. More disturbing still, several of Thompson's research contacts reported receiving anonymous threatening phone calls warning them to cease cooperation with his investigation into the orphanage's history, calls that were traced to disposable phones purchased with cash from locations hundreds of miles apart. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the former orphanage psychologist who had provided crucial testimony about Blackwood's methods, reported being followed by unknown individuals and finding evidence that her home had been searched during her absence. These incidents suggested that someone with significant resources and criminal experience was actively working to prevent the truth about the orphanage from being revealed. The investigation took an unexpected and initially hopeful turn when cadaver dogs detected human remains in a remote area of the cave system approximately 300 yards from the orphanage's foundation, leading to careful excavation efforts that investigators hoped might finally provide answers about Thompson's fate. However, forensic analysis revealed that the bones predated Thompson's disappearance by several decades, likely representing victims of Blackwood's crimes who had been disposed of in the natural cave system rather than the basement chamber. This discovery provided long-awaited closure for families of missing children, but offered no insight into Thompson's current whereabouts or condition. As summer 2024 approached, the massive search effort had succeeded in uncovering extensive evidence of historical murders, exposing community-wide conspiracies that had protected criminals for decades, mapping an underground network that spanned miles of Pennsylvania countryside, and identifying potential suspects in Thompson's disappearance. However, investigators had failed to answer the central question that haunted Sarah Thompson's sleepless nights. Where was her husband, and what had happened to him in those final moments before he vanished into the darkness that had already claimed 14 children and countless other victims over the years? The mounting frustration felt by investigators was matched by the growing desperation of Thompson's family, who watched as weeks turned into months without any concrete progress toward finding the man who had risked everything to seek justice for forgotten victims. Sarah Thompson's public statements grew increasingly critical of law enforcement efforts. Though Detective Martinez privately acknowledged that the case had reached an impasse, that traditional forensic science and investigative techniques seemed unable to resolve, leaving everyone involved to confront the possibility that some mysteries might remain forever beyond human understanding. September 17, 2024, marked exactly 6 months since Marcus Thompson's disappearance and brought a breakthrough that would fundamentally challenge everything investigators, family members, and the public thought they understood about the case that had captivated national attention. Urban explorer and professional cave mapping specialist Jennifer Walsh was conducting an independent survey of the limestone cave system, working under contract with a university research team studying underground ecosystems, when she discovered something that had somehow eluded 6 months of intensive official searches: a carefully concealed passage connecting the orphanage's basement chamber to a natural cave system approximately half a mile away through a route that defied both logic and previous geological surveys. Walsh's discovery came about through pure chance, and her unique expertise in identifying artificial modifications to natural cave systems, skills developed through years of exploring abandoned mines and forgotten underground installations across the eastern United States. While examining what appeared to be a natural rockfall that blocked one of the cave system's smaller passages, Walsh noticed subtle inconsistencies in the stone arrangement that suggested human intervention rather than natural geological processes. Her careful removal of loose rocks revealed not just another passage, but clear evidence of sophisticated engineering designed to create a hidden escape route while maintaining the appearance of natural cave formation. The concealed passage showed unmistakable signs of deliberate construction and recent use, with tool marks on the walls indicating systematic modification over many years, recently disturbed sediment that suggested regular traffic, and most shocking of all, items of clothing and personal effects that forensic analysis would later confirm belonged to Marcus Thompson. The discovery immediately transformed the investigation from a missing person case into an active rescue operation, as the evidence suggested that Thompson might still be alive somewhere in the extensive underground network that stretched for miles beneath the Pennsylvania countryside. Detective Martinez immediately sealed the newly discovered passage and organized the most comprehensive search of the cave system that had been attempted since Thompson's disappearance, bringing together specialized teams from across the region with equipment designed for both rescue operations and criminal investigation. What they found in the depths of the cave system defied every expectation and challenged the investigators' understanding of what had been occurring beneath Millbrook for decades. An elaborate underground complex that appeared to have been continuously inhabited since the orphanage's closure in 1962, complete with living quarters, workshops, and surveillance equipment that monitored the world above. The underground complex was a marvel of criminal engineering, featuring electrical power supplied by illegally tapped utility lines, sophisticated ventilation systems that prevented detection from the surface, living quarters furnished with items spanning multiple decades, food storage areas that could support several people for extended periods, and workshops filled with tools and equipment that suggested both maintenance capabilities and more sinister purposes. The discovery revealed that someone had been operating a completely hidden civilization beneath Millbrook for over 60 years, watching, waiting, and intervening whenever threats to their secrecy emerged. Most disturbing was a chamber containing elaborate surveillance equipment focused on the orphanage above and the surrounding community, complete with monitors showing multiple camera angles of the building's interior and exterior, listening devices that could intercept conversations throughout the town, and detailed files documenting the activities of anyone who showed interest in the orphanage's history. The surveillance operation was far more sophisticated than anything local law enforcement had imagined possible, suggesting resources and technical expertise that extended well beyond what survivors of the orphanage's original crimes should have possessed. The underground complex revealed evidence of long-term habitation by multiple individuals, with extensive knowledge of both the orphanage's criminal history and the cave system's intricate layout, though determining exactly who these inhabitants were proved challenging due to the sophisticated security measures they had employed. Personal belongings dating from different decades suggested that this hidden community had been maintained across multiple generations, with new members being recruited or born into a culture dedicated to protecting the orphanage's secrets at any cost. Among these items, investigators found Marcus Thompson's wallet, wedding ring, digital camera, and other personal effects, though Thompson himself was nowhere to be found in the areas searched. Thompson's digital camera provided the first concrete evidence of what had happened during his final hours above ground and his initial period in the underground complex. The camera's memory card contained over 200 photographs documenting his exploration of the hidden basement chamber, his discovery of the concealed passage, and his forced journey into the cave system beyond. The photos revealed that Thompson had not simply vanished, but had encountered someone in the hidden chamber who had compelled him to flee through the concealed passage, either through direct threats or actual violence that the images suggested but did not clearly document. The chronological sequence of Thompson's photographs told a terrifying story of pursuit and capture that unfolded over several hours on the day of his disappearance. Early photos showed his excitement at discovering the passage and his methodical documentation of its construction. But later, images revealed signs of distress, blurred photos suggesting rapid movement, pictures of the passage entrance being sealed behind him, and increasingly frantic attempts to document his surroundings as he realized he was trapped in an underground maze controlled by unknown individuals with unclear intentions. Most chilling was Thompson's final photograph, a selfie taken approximately 4 hours after his last text message to Sarah, showing his terrified face illuminated by his camera's flash, with shadowy figures visible in the background of what appeared to be the main chamber of the underground complex. The timestamp and GPS coordinates embedded in the image proved that Thompson had been alive and mobile well into the evening of his disappearance, raising hopes that he might still be alive somewhere in the unexplored depths of the cave system, while simultaneously confirming that his disappearance was the result of criminal activity rather than accident or voluntary departure. The investigation's focus immediately shifted to identifying and locating the inhabitants of the underground complex, though this proved extraordinarily challenging due to the sophisticated methods they had used to conceal their presence and their apparent ability to move through the cave system without detection. Forensic analysis of the living areas revealed DNA from multiple individuals, including several matches to people who had officially died decades earlier, suggesting either falsified death records or the involvement of family members who had inherited both the secrets and the responsibility of protecting them from discovery. Most shocking of all was the discovery of DNA evidence belonging to William Blackwood himself, despite official records documenting his death and burial in 1963. This evidence suggested either that his death had been falsified as part of an elaborate cover-up, or that close family members carrying his genetic markers had been involved in maintaining the underground complex and its surveillance operations. The implications were staggering. If Blackwood had faked his own death, he might still be alive and operating the underground complex, making him responsible not just for the original murders of 14 children, but for decades of additional crimes designed to protect his legacy of evil. The final breakthrough in Marcus Thompson's disappearance came through a combination of advanced thermal imaging technology and the persistence of search teams who refused to accept that a man could simply vanish without trace in a finite underground system, no matter how complex or extensively modified it might be. On October 3, 2024, exactly 6 months and 18 days after Thompson had entered the orphanage's hidden chamber, thermal imaging equipment detected a heat signature in a previously unknown section of the cave system that had somehow escaped months of intensive searching, revealing a hidden chamber that had been expertly concealed behind what appeared to be natural rock formations. Within this chamber, rescue teams found Marcus Thompson alive, but profoundly changed by his months-long ordeal in the underground prison that had become his world since that March afternoon, when curiosity about an orphanage's secrets had led him into a nightmare that challenged everything he believed about human nature and the persistence of evil. Thompson's physical condition was surprisingly stable, considering his captivity, though his psychological state reflected the deep trauma of imprisonment by individuals who had dedicated their lives to protecting the orphanage's darkest secrets through methods that included psychological torture, systematic intimidation, and threats against his family that had kept him compliant during the long months underground. Thompson's rescue led directly to the arrest of 3 individuals who had been living in the underground complex since the 1960s, maintaining a hidden civilization dedicated to ensuring that the truth about the orphanage's crimes never came to light. The arrests shocked investigators who had theorized about surviving conspirators, but never imagined the scope and sophistication of the operation they had uncovered. Eleanor Blackwood, the headmaster's widow who had faked her own death in 1964. Thomas Mills, the former groundskeeper who had helped dispose of children's bodies and had officially died in a car accident in 1967. And most shocking of all, David Blackwood, William's son, who had inherited his father's obsession with maintaining the conspiracy of silence and had spent his entire adult life expanding the underground complex into a fortress of secrecy. Eleanor Blackwood, now 89 but still mentally sharp and unrepentant about her crimes, provided investigators with a detailed confession that revealed the full scope of the orphanage's systematic abuse and the decades-long cover-up that had protected the perpetrators from justice. Her testimony confirmed that she and her husband had murdered 14 children between 1958 and 1962, using the hidden basement chamber as a torture and execution site, where children who threatened to expose the orphanage's abuse were eliminated with methodical brutality. The drainage system Thompson had discovered had indeed been used to dispose of evidence, with the children's remains being dissolved in acid or transported through the cave system to disposal sites miles away from the orphanage. The confession revealed that William Blackwood's supposed death in 1963 had been carefully staged to allow him to escape investigation, as state authorities began examining the orphanage's records more closely. Eleanor had faked her own death the following year, and together with loyal staff members who were either complicit in the crimes or terrorized into cooperation, they had established the underground complex as a base of operations for protecting their secrets. William Blackwood had actually died of natural causes in 1987, but not before training his son David to continue the family's mission of ensuring that their crimes remained hidden forever. The investigation revealed that this underground community had been responsible for at least 12 additional deaths over the decades since the orphanage's closure, including researchers, social workers, journalists, and family members who had pressed too hard for answers about missing children. Their methods had evolved and become increasingly sophisticated as technology advanced, incorporating surveillance systems, computer hacking, identity theft, and, when necessary, carefully planned accidents or disappearances that eliminated threats while avoiding suspicion. Thompson's determination and thorough documentation had posed the greatest threat they had ever faced, leading to their decision to keep him alive for extended interrogation rather than simply eliminating him as they had done with previous investigators. Thompson's 6 months in captivity had been spent in a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare designed to break his spirit and convince him to abandon his investigation into the orphanage's history. His captors had alternated between threats against his family and attempts to convince him that his research was causing unnecessary pain to survivors and family members who had found peace in forgetting the past. Eleanor Blackwood, in particular, had become obsessed with converting Thompson to her twisted perspective on justice and necessity, spending hours each day explaining her philosophy that protecting the orphanage's reputation justified any number of additional deaths. Thompson's survival was partly due to his value as a source of information about what he had discovered and shared with others, but also because Eleanor Blackwood had developed a pathological need to justify her lifetime of crimes to someone she perceived as intellectually capable of understanding her reasoning. Thompson's detailed account of his imprisonment revealed a deeply disturbed individual who genuinely believed that she was protecting innocent people from the pain of learning terrible truths, and who saw herself as a guardian of social stability rather than a serial killer who had spent decades eliminating anyone who threatened her secrets. The psychological manipulation had been sophisticated and relentless, with Thompson's captors using information gathered from their surveillance operations to convince him that his investigation had already caused his family tremendous suffering, and that his continued absence was destroying their lives. They showed him edited video footage of Sarah's desperate television interviews, recorded phone calls between his daughters discussing their father's apparent abandonment, and fabricated evidence suggesting that his business had collapsed and his family was facing financial ruin because of his obsession with the orphanage's history. However, Thompson's training as an architect and his experience with complex problem-solving had helped him maintain his sanity and develop strategies for resistance that his captors had not anticipated. He had secretly documented his captivity using materials he found in the underground complex, creating detailed maps of the cave system, recording conversations with his captors, and preparing evidence that would prove invaluable in their eventual prosecution. His engineering background had also helped him identify weaknesses in the complex's security systems and develop escape plans that he was prepared to implement if rescue efforts failed. The resolution of Thompson's disappearance brought long-awaited closure to multiple families affected by the orphanage's crimes, but also revealed the terrifying extent of institutional failure and community complicity that had allowed such systematic abuse to continue undetected for so many decades. The case prompted comprehensive reviews of child protection policies, missing person investigation procedures, and oversight mechanisms for residential facilities across Pennsylvania and beyond. More personally, it demonstrated the extraordinary dangers faced by those who choose to pursue forgotten truths, and showed how evil can perpetuate itself through silence, fear, and the complicity of those who choose to look away rather than confront uncomfortable realities. Marcus Thompson's ordeal ended with his freedom and the arrest of his captors, but his experience had changed him fundamentally in ways that would affect him and his family for the rest of their lives. His dedication to uncovering the truth had ultimately saved not only his own life, but finally brought justice for 14 children whose deaths had been hidden in darkness for over 60 years, along with the many other victims who had died to protect those original crimes. The abandoned orphanage was demolished in December 2024, but not before serving as the crime scene that helped convict the last perpetrators of crimes that had remained hidden far too long. Thompson's courage in pursuing the truth, despite the enormous personal cost and the danger to his family, ensured that the voices of forgotten children would finally be heard, their deaths properly mourned, and their killers held accountable for crimes that had corrupted an entire community for generations. His story became a testament to the power of individual determination to overcome institutional failure and the conspiracy of silence that protects evil when good people choose not to act. The underground complex was sealed permanently, its surveillance equipment destroyed, and its inhabitants finally brought to justice after decades of operating in the shadows beneath a community that had preferred not to know what horrors were being committed in their name. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Marcus Thompson's story. We'll see you in the next video. 1 year later today, Marcus Thompson stands in his rebuilt home office, surrounded by architectural blueprints of community centers and memorial gardens, rather than crime scene photographs and missing person files. The man who disappeared into darkness for 6 months has emerged forever changed, bearing invisible scars that run deeper than any physical wound. His hands still tremble slightly when he speaks about his captivity, and sudden loud noises cause him to freeze momentarily, but his eyes carry a quiet strength that wasn't there before, the strength of someone who stared into absolute evil and refused to let it consume him. Sarah Thompson watches her husband with a mixture of profound relief and lingering fear, knowing that while they survived the nightmare that nearly destroyed their family, some wounds never fully heal. Their twin daughters, now 13, understand that their father is a hero who saved forgotten children, but they also understand that heroism comes with a price that families pay long after the cameras stop rolling and the world moves on to the next tragedy. The Thompson family has learned to live with the knowledge that seeking justice sometimes requires sacrificing everything you hold dear. The trials of Eleanor Blackwood, Thomas Mills, and David Blackwood captivated the nation for 8 months, revealing horrors that challenged the public's faith in institutional oversight and community responsibility. Eleanor Blackwood, unrepentant to the end, was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 14 counts of first-degree murder and died in prison just 3 months later, taking with her secrets that may never be fully understood. Thomas Mills received a similar sentence and remains incarcerated, while David Blackwood was sentenced to death for his role in maintaining the criminal enterprise and the additional murders committed over 6 decades. The demolished orphanage site has been transformed into a memorial garden where 14 small stones bear the names of the children who died in the basement chamber, finally giving them the recognition and respect they were denied in life. The garden attracts visitors from across the country, families of missing children, survivors of institutional abuse, and those who simply need to believe that truth can emerge from darkness, no matter how long it remains hidden. Marcus Thompson visits the memorial every month, not to relive his trauma, but to remind himself why the pursuit of forgotten truths matters more than personal safety. The town of Millbrook struggles with its legacy of complicity and silence, though many residents have found redemption through supporting child protection organizations and advocating for transparency and institutional oversight. The community that once protected killers through willful ignorance has become a model for how collective guilt can be transformed into collective action, proving that even the darkest chapters of human behavior can become catalysts for positive change when people choose courage over comfort. In the end, Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that some mysteries are worth solving regardless of the cost, and that the voices of forgotten victims will find a way to be heard if someone is brave enough to listen. The darkness beneath the orphanage has been sealed forever, but the light that emerged from that darkness continues to shine, ensuring that 14 children who died in terror are finally remembered with love, and that their deaths serve as a warning to future generations about the price of silence in the face of evil. The truth, as Thompson learned in those 6 months underground, is rarely comfortable and never convenient, but it is always necessary, and it is always worth fighting for, no matter how deep it lies buried or how many people prefer to let it remain in darkness.